Hello, second grade Smarties, and welcome to Wit and Wisdom Module 2, the American West, and we are in Lesson 17. So yesterday, we introduced the legend of the blue bonnet. So we are going to be talking about what is happening in the legend of the blue bonnet. And before we get started, if you notice, we have a festive background. We have some magical wrapping paper that has Santa on unicorns and our festive little Christmas tree. So please enjoy the background as we do this video. All right, so we are talking about what's happening in the legend of the blue bonnet. So this was a book that told a story, right? We have talked about narrative nonfiction in the past. We've talked about informational books, but today this book tells a story. So we are going to be exploring who the characters were, what the setting was, what the problem was, and the resolution. So those are our story elements. We are trying to figure out how those elements help us understand the story. But before we dive into the book for a second time, I want you to listen to this page because it tells us about the tribe of Native Americans that the story was about. It says, for 3 days, the dancers danced to the sound of the drums. And for 3 days, the people called Comanche watched and waited. And even though the hard winter was over, no healing rains came. So the tribe, the Comanche tribe, what do you think happened to them? What do you think happened to the Comanche? Because we know this is a legend, and this tells a story about a certain state in the United States. But what do you think happened to the Comanche after this time? What do you think happened to them? Tell me in the puzzle. What do you think happened to the Comanche? All right. So we have some vocabulary words that we are going to talk about. We are going to talk about the word drought and restore. We want to know what the meanings of those words were. So a drought is when there is no rain. So I want you to think about The Buffalo Are Back. This was our first book that we read, and The Legend of the Blue Bonnet. When was there a time in The Buffalo Are Back that we saw drought, when there was no rain? Who struggled with the prairie lands when there was no rain? Think about when the Native Americans were pushed out of their land. Who tried to grow new crops, but no rain came? The early American settlers, right? The early American settlers tried to farm that land, but rain didn't come, and so it dried up. Are there any similarities with that information to the legend of the blue bonnet? Because in the legend of the blue bonnet, we learned that there was famine, that there were no rains. So I want you to think, what are the similarities between the Buffalo Are Back with the early American farmers and the people in the Comanche tribe? What is similar about those two groups? Tell me in the puzzle. They both didn't have rain to grow food. Because the land dried up, they could not grow food because the soil was not good. So there were droughts. It says, when the sacrifice is made, drought and famine will cease. This is from Legend of the Blue Bonnet. It says, life will be restored to the earth and to the people. So if drought caused the earth to wither, crumble, and erode, so all those words mean to fall apart. And we understand that the earth can be restored. What does restore mean? So if drought caused the ground to be dry and to fall apart, but if the sacrifice is made, Life will be restored. If I restore something, let's say I have a torn shirt and I restore it by putting new fabric on it or stitching it up. What am I doing to that shirt? I'm fixing it. I'm making it new. So restore means to make something new. In the puzzle, I want you to tell me, what does the word restore means? It means to make something new. So in the story, we learned that if they made the sacrifice to those great spirits, that the land would be restored. It would be made new with good soil to grow crops. All right, so today, second grade Smarties, what we are going to be doing is we are going to be listening to the story for a second time. We are going to pause halfway through the book to explore who the characters are, what the setting and the problem is. So get your bodies in a place where you can focus, listen, and look for those story elements. Here we go. Great spirits, the land is dying. Your people are dying too. The long line of dancers sang. Tell us what we have done to anger you. End this drought. Save your people. Tell us what we must do so you will send the rain that will bring back life. For 3 days, the dancers danced to the sound of the drums. And for 3 days, the people called Comanche watched and waited. And even though the hard winter was over, no healing rains came. Already we know who are the characters. Who are the characters in the story? Tell me in the puzzle. Who are the characters that we know? The people called Comanche. It tells us on the second page. So the Comanche people are the characters in the story. And what is the problem? What is keeping them from living? What's keeping them from growing? They don't have any rain. Let's see if we can find out what other problems we have or what our other characters are. Drought and famine are hardest on the very young and the very old. Among the few children left was a small girl named She Who Is Alone. She sat by herself watching the dancers. In her lap was a doll made from buckskin, a warrior doll. The eyes, nose, and mouth were painted on with the juice of berries. It wore beaded leggings and a belt of polished bone. On its head were brilliant blue jay feathers from the bird who cries Jay, Jay, Jay. She loved her doll very much. Soon, She Who Is Alone said to her doll, the shaman will go off alone to the top of the hill to listen for the words of the great spirits. Then we will know what to do so that once more the rains will come and the earth will be green and alive. The buffaloes will be plentiful and the people will be rich again. As she talked, she thought of the mother who made the doll, the father who brought the blue feathers. She thought of the grandfather and the grandmother she had never known. They were all like shadows. It seemed long ago that they had died from the famine. The people had named her and cared for her. The warrior doll was the only thing she had left from those distant days. In the puzzle, I want you to tell me, what is the problem in this story? What is happening to the Comanche people? Tell me in the puzzle. People are dying from this famine, right? They're dying from the famine because there is no rain. So the Comanche people are going to respond by trying to talk to the great spirits. And we've also discovered another character in this story. Who is the main character in this story? Tell me in the puzzle. She Who Is Alone. So this story is all about her journey. Let's keep going. The sun is setting, the runner called as he ran through the camp. The shaman is returning. The people gathered in a circle and the shaman spoke. I have heard the words of the great spirits, he said. The people have become selfish. For years, they have taken from the earth without giving anything back. The great spirits say the people must sacrifice. We must make a burnt offering of the most valued possession among us. The ashes of this offering shall then be scattered to the 4 points of the earth, the home of the winds. When this sacrifice is made, drought and famine will cease. Life will be restored to the earth and to the people. So we know the problem in the story is that there are no rains coming. What does the shaman tell the people why there are no rains? What have the people become? Why are they not growing food or having rain? Tell me in the puzzle. They've become selfish, right? They take from the land, but they don't give anything back. So they have to respond to that problem by making a sacrifice. The people sang a song of thanks to the great spirits for telling them what they must do. I'm sure it's not my new bow that the great spirits want, a warrior said. Or my special blanket, a woman added, as everyone went to their teepees to talk and think over what the great spirits had said. Everyone, that is, except for she who is alone. She held her doll tightly to her heart. You, she said, looking at the doll, you are my most valued possession. It is you the great spirits want. And she knew what she must do. As the council fires died out and the teepee flaps began to close, the small girl returned to the teepee where she slept to wait. The night outside was still, except for the distant sound of the night bird with the red wings. Soon everyone in the teepee was asleep, except she who is alone. Under the ashes of the teepee fire, one stick still glowed. She took it and quietly crept out into the night. Then, gathering twigs, she started a fire with a glowing fire stick. The small girl watched as the twigs began to catch and burn. She thought of her grandmother and grandfather, her mother and father, and all the people, their suffering, their hunger. And before she could change her mind, she thrust the doll into the fire. She watched until the flames died down and the ashes had grown cold. Then, scooping up a handful, she who is alone scattered the ashes to the home of the winds, the north and the east, the south and the west. And there she fell asleep until the first light of the morning sun woke her. She looked out over the hill, and stretching out from all sides where the ashes had fallen, the ground was covered with flowers, beautiful flowers as blue as the feathers in the hair of the doll, as blue as the feathers of the bird who cries J, J, J. When the people came out of their teepees, they could scarcely believe their eyes. They gathered on the hill with she who is alone to look at the miraculous sight. There was no doubt about it. The flowers were a sign of forgiveness from the great spirits. And as the people sang and danced their thanks to the great spirits, a warm rain began to fall, and the land began to live again. From that day on, the little girl was known by another name, one who dearly loved her people. And every spring, the great spirits remembered the sacrifice of a little girl and fill the hills and valleys of the land, now called Texas, with the beautiful blue flowers, even to this very day. All right, we're going to pause for a second. We did not learn what the name of the setting was at the beginning of the story. We know it took place in the American West, but on this page, what state did we learn that the story took place in? I'm going to read this page one more time. In every spring, the great spirits remember the sacrifice of a little girl and fill the hills and valleys of the land, now called Texas, with the beautiful blue flowers, even to this very day. In the puzzle, I want you to tell me, where did this story take place? It took place in the state of Texas. It wasn't called Texas in the book, but we know that the story is about the history of Texas. So the problem was that the great spirits felt that the Comanche people were selfish. And so they were not giving them rain to grow food. There was suffering, there was starving. How did she who is alone respond to that problem? What did she do to fix that problem? Tell me in the puzzle. She sacrificed her doll. Why did she sacrifice her doll? Because it was the most valued thing. She had to give what was most valuable to her. So, what happened after she sacrificed her doll? What happened when she made that sacrifice to the great spirits? What happened at the end of the story? Tell me in the puzzle. The great spirits had forgiven the Comanche people and brought a warm rain and the beautiful blue flowers. So, thinking about this book, we know that the problem was that there was famine and no rain. There was no food. And so the Comanche people had to respond to that problem by making a sacrifice. At the end, the Comanche people are forgiven by the great spirits because of she who is alone. So, thinking about the setting of the story, how did the setting change from the beginning to the end of the book? What was different about the beginning and the end? How did it change? How did the setting change from the beginning to the end? Tell me in the puzzle. It started by being dry and brittle. The ground was falling apart, right? They didn't have any food. There was no green grass. But at the end, what helped the grass return? The warm rains. So in the end, we see the green grass and the blue flowers. So as we are thinking about this book, we have talked about who the settings were or who the characters were, what the setting was, the problem, the response to the problem, and the resolution. So as we think about that story, it's important that if we are telling someone about this story, that we can retell it in a way that tells all the important parts. So we can use our knowledge of those story elements to retell the story. So when we are retelling a story, we want to try to do it in as few sentences as possible, but we want to make sure to talk about the characters, the setting, the problem, the response to the problem, and the resolution. So we could use kind of a formula to retell this story. So, for example, we could use this formula to help us retell a story. So, we could start by talking about where the story took place. So, in our story, it started in Texas. It started in the land of the Comanche people. When the Comanche people did not have rain to grow food. So, I talked about the setting, the characters, and the problem. It started in the state of Texas when the Comanche people did not have food to grow because there was no rain. Then something changes. Then the Comanche people find out they need to make a sacrifice. So a little girl sacrifices her most valued possession, which is her doll. The girl's name was She Who Is Alone. Finally, when she sacrificed her doll, the great spirits brought blue flowers and rain to make the land rich again. So I was able to retell that story by talking about the setting. It took place in the state of Texas. It didn't tell us it was the state of Texas until the end, but we know that the state of Texas is in the Southwest. We talked about the characters. The characters were She Who Is Alone and the Comanche people. We also talked about their problem. So we started by telling where the story was, who was in the story, and what their problem was. They didn't have rain to grow food, and so people were starving and dying. Then we introduced our main character, she who is alone, and she made a sacrifice to please the great spirits. After she made that sacrifice, our resolution was that the great spirits brought rain and richness and blue flowers to the land of Texas. So when we are retelling the story, we want to make sure that we have those 4 important elements. Tomorrow, my smarties in my class are going to be retelling the story of the legend of the Blue Bonnet and Flipgrid. So we are going to use those 4 elements. So I asked you at the beginning of this lesson, what do you think happened to the Comanche people after this legend? Not what happened in the story, but what happened after? What happened over time? So we learn in history that the Comanche people were eventually pushed out of the state of Texas and they were forced to live on reservations in Oklahoma. That happened in the mid 1800s. So that happened right around this time. And I have added a new color for that. So I am adding to our timeline. We talk about our timeline of the Great American West from long ago when the Native Americans lived with the buffalo and people came to the Great Plains. And then we talked about how new people came west on the Oregon Trail. We talked about that with Olivia Clark. But we also learned in the 1800s that the American government broke its promises with the Native Americans, which led to the Indian Wars. Still in the 1800s, Native Americans were forced to live in reservations. Remember, those are places that are set aside for Native American people, and they cannot leave that reservation. When they were forced into those reservations, remember, the early American settlers tried to farm the lands, but drought came, no rain came, and so everything dried up and the bison nearly died. But then over time, President Roosevelt and other people in the American government tried to make changes to help the prairie become healthy again. And today, the prairie is healthy and the buffalo are protected. But we are looking right here during the time where the Comanche people were pushed out of Texas and forced to live on the reservations in Oklahoma. Thinking about that fact, that piece of information, they had to leave Texas, but in the story, in the legend, they lived in the state of Texas. So, using that information, it took place in Texas. There was a famine and there were no buffalo, but they still lived in Texas. So, do you think this legend took place in the 1800s, or is this legend told long ago? Did it take place during the 1800s or long ago? Tell me on the puzzle, which one do you think which part of the timeline do you think this story fits in? Does it fit in long ago or during the time when early settlers came to the West? Tell me in the puzzle. So using our knowledge of the fact that in the story we learned that the Native Americans lived on the land of Texas and that they talked to the great spirits and that they were trying to farm the land, waiting for the rain. This legend takes place long ago. So we would say that, so Miss Mason's going to add this, but I would say that the legend of the Blue Bonnet was told long ago. So remember, legends are stories that are told over time in a people group or a family. So you might have a legend that you have heard from your family before, a fantastic story about your great 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 grandmother or great 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 grandfather. Those can be true stories or they can be made up stories based on true events. So, the legend of the Blue Bonnet was a story told long ago that moved with the Comanche people over time. All right. And as always, with every book that we read, we will have a writing activity to go with it. So, this week we are talking about introduction. Say the word introduction for me. Introductions are sentences that are at the beginning of a paragraph. They're different from the topic statement because it gives background information about the topic you are writing about. The topic statement tells the reader what they will learn. So I have a paragraph that is written about the legend of the Blue Bonnet. If you notice, my sentences are in different colors. That's because I have my introduction, my topic statement, my sentences with the details, and my conclusion, all different colors, so we can figure out what part is which. All right, so listen to this paragraph, and I want you to think, what do you think the introduction is? Okay. Different old stories come from different Native American tribes. The legend of the Blue Bonnet tells a story about the Comanche tribe. The Comanche in the book live in Texas. They dance and sing to the great spirits for help during a bad drought. The Comanche in the legend of the Blue Bonnet are one of many Native American tribes. All right. So, looking at this paragraph, which sentence do you think is the introduction? Remember, this goes at the beginning of a paragraph. It gives us information about our topic. So in the puzzle, I want you to tell me, is the purple sentence the introduction? Does it tell us about the topic? The yellow, the green, or the red? In the puzzle, I want you to tell me what color is the sentence that is our introduction. So the purple sentence is our introduction. It gives us background information about stories and about Native American tribes. So different old stories come from different Native American tribes. That is information about the topic of the legend of the Blue Bonnet. So the yellow sentence was our topic statement. It tells us what the legend is about and who is it about. The green section, there's two sentences. Those are our details. The details were that the Comanche in the book live in Texas. That tells us where the people lived. And it tells us what they did. They dance and sing to the great spirits for help during a bad drought. That is what the story was about. That was the problem. Our red sentence was the conclusion. Remember, our conclusion kind of matches what we said in our topic statement. The Comanche and the legend of the Blue Bonnet are one of many Native American tribes. So when we add an introduction, it gives us more information about our topic, but our topic statement tells us what the reader will learn. All right, and as always, we are going to finish up with a deep dive, and we are talking about the vocabulary word sacrifice. So sacrifice means to give up something that is important, or it's like an offering. So sacrifice can be an action word, but it can also be a noun. So think back in the book when we learn about she who is alone. She made a sacrifice. She gave up something that is important to her. So remember when the shaman said, when this sacrifice is made, drought and famine will cease. Life will be restored to the earth and to the people. So the Comanche people had to make a sacrifice. They had to give up something that is important. In the puzzle, I want you to tell me, what did she who is alone sacrifice to the great spirits? What did she sacrifice? Tell me in the puzzle. She sacrificed her warrior doll. Why did she sacrifice her warrior doll? She sacrificed it because it was important to her. It was her most valued thing. So when we make a sacrifice, that means that we are giving up something that is important. It's not always a thing, but sometimes people sacrifice their time, their money, their things, their food to help someone or to help multiple people. I want you to think, when have you seen someone give up something for someone else? Think really hard about it. When have you seen someone in your life give up something for someone else? Tell me a time that you've seen that in the puzzle. So, an example that I've seen of this is growing up, my mom and dad would always sacrifice their drink when we would be outside on a hot day. I would say, I'm so thirsty, mom. And my mom would sacrifice her drink so I wouldn't be thirsty. She gave up something so that I could be okay. I've also seen people sacrifice their money to help other people. They give away their money to help others be safe and healthy. So we can think of all the different sacrifices people have made. But remember, a sacrifice means that you give up something that is important or it's an offering. So I want us to think of a sentence that we can make using the word sacrifice. Blank made a sacrifice when blank. Who is a person that has made a sacrifice that you know of? Think about who would you put right there. So you can say, she who is alone made a sacrifice when her people needed blank. They needed rain. So she made a sacrifice when her people were in need. All right, Smarties, as always, I want you to keep that growth mindset. Good learners do hard things. And I will see you tomorrow with another lesson. Happy learning, guys.